She told me, Chavez, come up with me, I want to show you something. So he went up to her house, and she said, look, here's my family. 8 people were sitting in this small room. She said, we are cooking with the legs of my bed because there's no fuel because of the strikes. She said, tomorrow, she said to me, tomorrow we will use the whole bed. The day after that we'll use the chairs. The day after that we'll pull our doors down and we'll burn them to make some soup. We don't want you to give up. And he said many, many other people said similar things to him. And this gave him an enormous boost. And of course, in material terms, here the help of the Cubans was absolutely decisive. Because when this happened, help came from Cuba in the shape of the only help this small island of 12 million people can give, which is to help with the human capital that they have created. And this human capital that they have created is doctors and teachers and social helpers who came in tens of thousands to help Venezuela. And when they first arrived in Venezuela, the newspapers of the oligarchy and the television stations of Cisneros said, these are not really doctors coming to help you, they are terrorists. I remember reading this with my own eyes, and I said, how can they be so stupid? Because these doctors are going to be treating poor people in Venezuela. People will know, including people who vote for these opposition parties, and there are many of them, even they will know, and that's exactly what happened. The impact of these clinics and cheap free medicines, free medical treatment in their own areas, in different parts of the country, had a gigantic impact. And here you had a very concrete example of what we can call the Bolivarian process, a continental process where one country helps another in its time of need. And this is the importance of the idea, which is, still an idea, and some people think it's a utopian idea. I think it's a very realistic idea of a Bolivarian federation spanning the entire continent, because this is the best and most constructive way in which to build the continent, in which to develop it, in which to cater to its human needs, and in which to make it strong so it can confront any power which challenges it. That's the way to do it. And people forget this in different parts of the globe, that if you allow yourself to be singled out one by one, you can be, and you can be destroyed. When you unite not only within a country but with other countries and create regional networks, then it can have a massive impact. And the help Cuba gave Venezuela and the help Venezuela gave Cuba is one of the more inspiring stories of the 21st century, the beginning of this century. And then we had the major development of the victory in Bolivia, which was also remarkable and which also was the result of giant social movements in that country, which had campaigned against the privatization of basic utilities like water. That's how these movements arose. And Evo Morales is the beneficiary of these mass social movements. And he knows that. He says it in public. But it's interesting that the first thing the newly elected president of Bolivia did was to fly to Havana. So I always said to people that Evo Morales' victory in Bolivia is the nicest possible revenge Che Guevara could ever have had. Because it's without violence, it's a victory in a democratic election, and Che's 78th birthday was recently celebrated in Bolivia. So it's wonderful when these things happen. But the fact that he chose to fly to Havana and on his way back stopped over in Caracas, that's what made people feel that a big continental movement is possible. Now, these movements never go up. They sometimes go up, they sometimes come down. So Peru didn't happen, but Mexico could have happened. And all the information we now have, which has been accumulated by independent media people, some even very professional journalists working for the right-wing media, what do they tell us? That the Mexican elections once again were stolen by a corrupt state, which did not wish to see López Obrador elected. Why? Because they said it's not that his domestic program was that radical, but it offered some things to the poor, and in terms of foreign policy, they were extremely worried that Mexico would become an ally of Venezuela and Bolivia and Cuba, and that would then represent a very big shift if Mexico went even halfway in that direction on a continental scale, which is, of course, true. And Jorge Castaneda, the former foreign minister of Mexico, wrote an article in Foreign Affairs pleading with the United States not to allow this to happen. Well, I don't think the United States needed to do too much because the Mexican oligarchy is very expert in stealing elections. They did it several years ago. And when Cardenas was denied the election, and everyone knew he had won, and it's the same business again. But you know, you can do it once and get away with it. You do it twice and people begin to get very angry. And the third time, people might not wait for an election. That's the danger if you constantly go on offending the people in that way. And if you look at the news which comes out of Mexico, Oaxaca, one of the largest native cities in Mexico. I used to go to that country a lot, and I used to say, it's the only city in Latin America I've been to where the indigenous people, you see them smiling a lot, because it's their city, more or less. But there's been a virtual insurrection in Oaxaca when they tried to crush a teacher's strike by force. In other parts of Mexico, there is great and growing anger. So this newly elected, so-called elected government is going to have a very rough time. I predict that. It's not going to be easy. And then the elections in Peru completely polarized in a crazy way by demonizing Chavez, and the whole campaign revolved around Chavez, saying if Humala wins, Peru will become part of Bolivia. I mean, it's absurdity. But that's the way they tried to frighten people. Now, the other part of this, which I want to talk about, is the following. Venezuela is a country which, as we know, has existed for a long time, but it's a country that was not so well known globally. Very few people talked about it, very few people knew about it. I knew a little bit about it because I had Venezuelan friends in the 60s and 70s. And we used to talk about exciting things going on there, which later turned out not to be so exciting, like the armed struggle groups, who, you know, we used to dream were on the verge of taking power, but we later found out they were very remote from taking power. But never mind, some of us were knowledgeable about it. But by and large, on a world scale, it didn't have a very big impact. And certainly in the 80s and 90s, no. Then how is it that today Venezuela is a country which is known all over the world? That's a very interesting development. Everyone knows the name of this country, and everyone knows the name of its president. And this is not just true in North America and South America, where it's obviously known. I am now talking about the Arab world, which I also visit a lot, and I am talking about the large continent of Asia, which I also visit a lot, and also parts of Africa. Now, why? Why? And the reason is obvious. This is the country which has dared to challenge the consensus. And it has given people hope all over the world. And I want to tell you a story. Some years ago, Al Jazeera, the television station which has been bombed more by the United States Air Force than any other television in history, bombed in Afghanistan, bombed in Iraq, its leading correspondent killed in Iraq, etc. But it survives, and is still watched by millions of people. They decided to do an interview with Hugo Chavez, so they sent one of their top journalists to Caracas. He did an interview for 1 hour. And Chavez, as you know, is normal with him, can talk for 1 hour without any problems. He probably thought it was a short interview, but it was quite a long interview for Al Jazeera. So they interviewed him for 1 hour, and because many people who watch them don't like reading subtitles, what they always do is put an Arab voice on it. So they put a very fine voice on it, and the result was electric. The guy who did the interview told me when I met him in Qatar, he said, "You can't imagine the response." I said, "Tell me." And he said, "Well, what happened? That program was watched by 36 million people in the Arab, throughout the region. We got more emails after that than any other program we have ever shown. And we get lots on Palestine, Iraq, but never like that." So I said, "How many?" He said, "We got tens of thousands of emails. We had to hire people in order to deal with it and reply to them." And I said, "What did they say? Were they hostile, sympathetic?" He said, no. 95, 96% were sympathetic. And in different ways, they all asked one question: when will the Arab world produce a Chavez? Now, it's an important question, this. Why? Because everyone in the Arab world knows what their governments are like. Secondly, they know that they have underneath their lands unlimited quantities of oil. And Chavez, in his interview, explained what Venezuela was doing in a modest way, using oil reserves to help the poor. And people, that point went home very deep, because they said, underneath our lands, there is enough oil to educate the entire Islamic world, free, and free university education, but why don't we do it? Why don't we do it? That's the question which many people asked. And so the impact of Venezuela on that level has been enormous on a global scale. And I encounter it, and I'm often asked questions in the strangest places about Venezuela and Chavez. And that has not happened before, and that the last time this happened, of course, in the world was in the late 50s and 60s, at the height of the revolutionary wave and the success of the Cuban Revolution and the victory against Batista. But since that time, and especially since the 80s and 90s, this has not happened. And that is what creates a feeling amongst people that hope is possible, that it's possible to do something, that we shouldn't despair. And in fact, you know, if I was running the United States, of course a lot of things would be different, but if I was running the United States, I would be pleased that these are governments which are coming to power through democratically elected systems. They are enhancing democracy. They are enhancing accountability. They're trying to help their poor. The more these countries create a self-sufficient societies, the less they could think there'll be the big desire to cross the borders and come to the United States, because people only leave their own countries when nothing's available. So it's linked to the whole question of the migrations. No one wants to leave their villages or their towns. They only leave because they can't find any work. And if you help to create societies in which work is possible, and in which dignity is possible, and in which people can respect themselves, they won't leave. Why come then to a country where they're not respected and where they're treated virtually like slaves?